A disabled kitten begged a giant dog for help. And what the dog did next is a miracle. Left broken in a ditch during a raging storm, too weak to cry, this tiny kitten was never supposed to survive. But when a massive, battle-scarred dog appeared from the shadows, everything changed. He was feared, hunted, and hiding from something terrible, yet he chose to protect the weakest creature he'd ever seen. What no one knows is, this dog wasn't just running from danger. He was running from his past. And now the past is coming back, armed, angry, and ready to destroy everything. Why did this dog risk everything for a helpless kitten? What is he really hiding? And when the truth comes crashing in, who will make it out alive? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. Thunder cracked across the dark Texas sky like a whip, sending sheets of cold rain hammering down onto the empty back road. A pickup truck's taillights glowed red through the downpour as it slowed, and without warning, a cardboard box tumbled from its bed into the roadside ditch. The vehicle accelerated away, leaving only muddy tire tracks and the sound of the storm behind. Inside the sodden box, a tiny calico kitten shivered, her back legs twisted uselessly beneath her. The rain quickly turned the cardboard to mush, and Cricket, as she would soon be known, found herself exposed to the full fury of the storm. Her soft mewl was barely audible above the thunder as she dragged herself through the mud with her front paws, seeking any kind of shelter. Less than a quarter-mile away, a massive dog moved like a shadow along the edge of an abandoned ranch property. Harlan's weathered coat was matted from the rain, but his piercing eyes remained alert as he patrolled his temporary sanctuary. The old barn where he'd been hiding since escaping the fighting rings had become his safe haven, though safety was a foreign concept to him after years of abuse. His ears pricked forward at an unfamiliar sound carried on the wind, something small, something alive, something in distress. The massive Anatolian shepherd hesitated, his instincts warring within him. Years of forced fighting had taught him to attack the weak, but something deeper, something that hadn't been completely beaten out of him, pulled him toward the sound. Harlan followed his ears through the storm, his huge paws leaving deep prints in the mud. The sound grew clearer, a faint, desperate mewling that barely rose above the drumming rain. He found Cricket half submerged in a puddle, her tiny body trembling as she tried unsuccessfully to climb onto higher ground. The battle-scarred dog stood frozen, studying the kitten. His experiences had taught him that all contact meant pain, either receiving it or being forced to inflict it. But as he watched Cricket's struggles, memories stirred of a time before the fighting rings, when he had been young and knew kindness. Thunder boomed overhead, making Cricket flinch. Her eyes, barely open, found Harlan's massive form looming above her. She didn't have the strength to feel fear anymore. She just mewled again, a sound of pure helplessness that reached past Harlan's scars and touched something he thought had died long ago. Moving with surprising gentleness for such a large animal, Harlan lowered his head and carefully nudged Cricket with his nose. She was cold, so cold, and growing weaker by the minute. The kitten made no attempt to escape or fight. She couldn't. Her twisted back legs made that impossible. In that moment, Harlan made a decision that would change both their lives. With extreme care, he maneuvered his muzzle under Cricket's tiny body and lifted her from the puddle. She weighed almost nothing, this scrap of wet fur and fragile bones. Holding her as gently as if she were made of glass, Harlan began the careful journey back to his barn. The old structure creaked in the wind as Harlan carried Cricket inside. He had made himself a den in the corner using old hay and forgotten horse blankets, and it was here that he brought his tiny charge. Setting her down in the softest part of his makeshift bed, Harlan used his body to shield Cricket from the draft that whistled through the barn's wooden walls. Cricket's eyes were growing heavy, but for the first time since being abandoned, she felt something close to safe. The huge dog's presence beside her radiated warmth, and his steady breathing created a rhythm that helped drown out the storm's violence. She managed to stretch out one small paw and touch Harlan's fur before exhaustion overtook her. Harlan remained vigilant as Cricket slept, his protective instincts awakening with each crack of thunder that made her small body twitch. He had spent so long seeing every living thing as either a threat or a target that this new role, protector rather than aggressor, felt foreign yet somehow right. As the storm raged on outside, two castaway souls found an unexpected moment of peace in each other's company. Their shared loneliness eased by this chance encounter in the rain. The night wore on, and Harlan found himself doing something he hadn't done since his escape. He relaxed his guard, if only slightly. The sound of Cricket's tiny breaths and the warmth of her small body against his side sparked something in his wounded heart, a feeling that perhaps not everything in the world was meant to hurt him, and that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to hurt everything in return. The Texas sun rose harsh and bright after the storm, casting long shadows across the weathered fence posts of the abandoned ranch. Ruby Calderon gripped her steering wheel tightly as she pulled up to the familiar gate, her heart heavy with memories. The property had been her brother's pride and joy before his death, and now the bank was taking it all away. She stepped out of her truck, her boots crunching on scattered gravel. At 58 years old, Ruby moved with the careful determination of someone who had spent decades on her feet in hospital emergency rooms. Her grey-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. "Just get what you can and get out," she muttered to herself, fishing the temporary key from her pocket. The bank had given her 3 days to collect any personal items before they cleared the property. 3 days to pack up what remained of her brother's life. The main house stood silent and empty, its windows dark and accusatory. Ruby couldn't bring herself to go inside just yet. Instead, she walked the perimeter of the property, taking inventory of what had changed since her last visit months ago. The grass had grown wild, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete near the old workshop. A sound caught her attention, faint but distinct. A cry? Ruby paused, listening intently. There it was again, coming from the direction of the old barn. Her brother had used it for storage in his final years, and it looked even more decrepit now, its red paint peeling like old scabs. Ruby approached cautiously, years of nursing experience having taught her to assess situations before rushing in. The barn door was partially open, and she could hear movement inside. The crying sound came again, higher pitched this time, almost like a baby animal. She pushed the door wider, letting morning light spill across the dusty floor. What she saw made her freeze mid-step. A massive dog, easily 130 pounds, stood over what appeared to be a makeshift nest of hay. His scarred face and muscular frame spoke of violence, but it was his eyes that held Ruby's attention. They weren't wild or vicious. They were calculating, assessing her just as she assessed him. A deep growl rumbled from the dog's chest, but he didn't advance. Instead, he shifted slightly, and Ruby saw what he was protecting. A tiny calico kitten, barely visible in the hay. The kitten mewled again, and Ruby's nurse's instincts kicked in as she noticed its oddly positioned back legs. "Easy there, big fellow," Ruby said softly, slowly lowering herself to a crouch. She kept her movements smooth and deliberate, her voice steady and calm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." The dog's ears twitched at her voice, but his growl subsided slightly. Ruby noticed the scars that crisscrossed his coat, some old and faded, others more recent. She'd seen similar marks in the emergency room, defensive wounds, fighting wounds. This dog had survived hell. "You've been through some rough times, haven't you?" She continued speaking, not moving from her spot. "Those marks tell quite a story. I bet you're tired of fighting." The dog's tail remained low, but some of the tension left his massive frame. The kitten mewled again, and this time the sound was clearly weak. Ruby's medical training screamed at her to help, but she knew she had to move carefully. "That little one needs care," she said, more to herself than the dog. "And I'm betting you could use some food yourself." She backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact with the dog until she reached the barn door. Once outside, Ruby hurried to her truck. She always kept emergency supplies in her vehicle, a habit from her nursing days. In the toolbox behind the cab, she found an old blanket and some bottles of water. She also had half a sandwich left from her drive out. Returning to the barn, she found the dog hadn't moved from his protective stance. Ruby tore the sandwich into pieces and placed them on the ground, then set down a shallow bowl she'd made by cutting the top off a water bottle. "I'll leave these here for you," she said, backing away again. "And I'll bring more tomorrow. That little one needs special care, but we'll take it slow. No need to rush anything." The dog watched her intently, but made no aggressive moves. As Ruby reached her truck, she saw him finally lower his head to sniff at the food she'd left. Something about his gentleness with the kitten, despite his fierce appearance, touched her deeply. In her years as a trauma nurse, she'd learned that the worst scars weren't always visible, and healing took many forms. Ruby sat in her truck for a long moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The bank could wait another day for her to start clearing out the house. Right now, there were 2 lost souls in that barn who needed help, and for the first time since her brother's death, Ruby felt a sense of purpose stirring in her heart. Over the next week, Ruby settled into a gentle routine. Each morning, she'd arrive at the old barn carrying fresh supplies, soft puppy food mixed with warm water for Cricket, high-protein dog food for Harlan, and clean towels. The early September air was still warm, but the thunderstorms had passed, leaving behind clear skies and golden sunlight that filtered through the barn's weathered boards. On the 3rd day, Ruby brought an old camping chair and set it up just inside the barn door. She'd sit quietly, speaking in low, soothing tones while Harlan watched her with those intelligent eyes. "You know," she said one morning, "my son James used to love this place when he was little." She smiled sadly, remembering weekends spent here before the arguments, before the silence that now stretched between them like an endless desert. Harlan's ears would prick up at her voice, though he maintained his protective position near Cricket. The tiny kitten was growing stronger, managing to drag herself forward with her front legs, while her twisted back legs trailed behind. Ruby's heart ached watching her struggle, but Cricket's determination reminded her of countless patients she'd helped through their recoveries. By the 5th day, Harlan allowed Ruby to inch closer to Cricket's hay nest. She brought a small first aid kit and spoke constantly as she worked. "I'm just going to clean these sores, sweet girl. Easy now, big fellow. I won't hurt her." The massive dog watched intently as Ruby gently dabbed antibiotic ointment on Cricket's raw spots where she'd dragged herself through the mud. Ruby found herself talking more openly to these unlikely companions than she had to anyone in months. "James hasn't spoken to me since his father's funeral 2 years ago," she confided one afternoon while mixing Cricket's food. "Sometimes I wonder if I spent too many years taking care of other people's emergencies and not enough time with my own family." Harlan's steady gaze seemed to hold no judgment, only quiet understanding. The breakthrough came on day 7. Ruby arrived to find Harlan standing at the barn door, tail giving a slight wag. When she settled into her chair, he actually approached, sniffing her outstretched hand before allowing her to touch his scarred head. "You've been through so much," she whispered, fingers gentle on his weathered fur, "but you still found it in your heart to save that little one." That evening, Ruby made a decision. Cricket needed professional care, and Harlan's wounds, both physical and emotional, deserved proper treatment. She brought her largest pet carrier the next morning, along with a sturdy leash. "Time for a little trip," she announced, her voice confident despite her racing heart. To her amazement, Harlan seemed to sense her intentions. He watched calmly as she lined the carrier with soft blankets and carefully lifted Cricket inside. When Ruby held out the leash, he lowered his head, allowing her to clip it to his worn collar. "You're ready for help, aren't you?" she asked softly. "Both of you are." The drive to the veterinary clinic was peaceful. Harlan sat regally in the back seat of her truck, while Cricket's carrier rested securely on the passenger side. Ruby had called ahead, explaining the situation to ensure they'd be ready for such an unusual pair. The young vet tech who greeted them couldn't contain her amazement. "I've never seen anything quite like this," she said, watching Harlan gently nose Cricket's carrier as they settled into an exam room. A fighting dog protecting a disabled kitten, it's like something out of a fairy tale. While they waited for the veterinarian, the tech pulled out her phone. "Would you mind if I took their picture? I volunteer with a small rescue group. We might be able to find someone who could donate a mobility cart for Cricket." Ruby nodded, touched by the offer. The tech snapped several photos of Cricket, particularly focusing on her twisted back legs. "These little custom carts can be expensive," she explained, "but our followers are amazing. Someone might have one they're not using anymore, or know someone who builds them." Ruby watched as Harlan maintained his protective vigil, even in these strange surroundings. His transformation from the growling guardian she'd first encountered to this gentle giant reminded her that healing was possible, even for the most wounded souls. Perhaps, she thought, it wasn't too late to bridge the gap with James either. As the tech posted the photos online, Ruby stroked Harlan's head and tickled Cricket's ears. These two abandoned creatures had somehow found each other in the darkness of that stormy night, and now they were helping her find her way back to light as well. Sometimes, she realized, the most profound healing comes from unexpected sources. The road ahead would hold challenges: Cricket's disability, Harlan's emotional scars, and Ruby's own wounded relationships. But sitting in that sterile exam room, surrounded by the warmth of unconditional love between two unlikely friends, Ruby felt hope stirring in her heart for the first time in years. The photo of Cricket, nestled safely in her blankets with Harlan's massive form protectively nearby, spread across social media like wildfire. Local animal lovers shared it hundreds of times, touched by the unlikely friendship between the disabled kitten and the giant dog. The story resonated, a tiny, helpless creature saved by an imposing guardian. Within 48 hours, the image had reached well beyond their small Texas community. In a dingy apartment 30 miles away, Devlin Sneed scrolled through his phone, his cold eyes narrowing as he recognized the distinctive scarring along Harlan's muzzle. The sight of his former prizefighter, the dog he had spent years molding into a brutal weapon, standing guard over a worthless kitten, made his jaw clench. He had lost thousands when Harlan turned on him during that last fight, breaking free and disappearing into the night. "Well, well," Devlin muttered, zooming in on the photo. "Looks like someone's gone soft." He read through the post details carefully, noting the veterinary clinic's name and location. A plan began forming in his mind. Since his release from prison 3 weeks ago, he had been looking for a way to restart his operation. Having Harlan back would send the right message to his old connections. Devlin pulled out a fresh notebook, his handwriting precise as he crafted his cover story. He would pose as a representative from a legitimate rescue organization, claiming Harlan had been stolen from their sanctuary months ago. The paperwork would look official enough to fool most people. Small-town clinics and good-hearted volunteers rarely questioned documentation too closely when it came to helping animals. Back at the ranch, unaware of the darkness gathering, Ruby swept years of dust and debris from the barn's concrete floor. She had decided to make the space properly habitable for her unusual family. The morning sun streamed through gaps in the weathered boards, catching motes of dust in golden beams. Harlan watched from his spot near Cricket's hay nest, his tail thumping gently against the floor whenever Ruby looked his way. "We'll need to patch that roof before the next storm," Ruby said, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. She had already cleared out old machinery and brought in fresh straw. A proper dog bed for Harlan sat in one corner, though he seemed to prefer staying close to Cricket. Maybe even put in some proper windows for ventilation. Cricket's condition showed promising signs of improvement. The antibiotics from the vet had cleared up her infections, and the high-calorie diet was helping her gain strength. Though her back legs remained twisted, she had learned to scoot herself around with surprising speed, using her front paws to pull herself wherever she wanted to go. Ruby had created a soft, clean space for her, lined with puppy pads and easily within reach of her food and water. The transformation in Harlan was even more remarkable. The constant tension in his massive frame had begun to ease. He no longer startled at sudden movements, and his eyes had lost some of their haunted look. That morning, he had actually played with an old rope toy Ruby had brought, tugging it gently as his tail wagged. The sight had brought tears to her eyes. "You know," Ruby said, settling down in her folding chair near Cricket's nest, "I never thought I would feel at home here again after Tommy died." She reached out to scratch behind Harlan's ears, smiling as he leaned into her touch. "But you two have changed that somehow." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the barn floor as Ruby organized her tools. She had plans to repair the east wall tomorrow, maybe even plant some flowers near the entrance. Cricket dozed peacefully in her nest while Harlan lounged nearby, his massive head resting on his paws. The scene was so peaceful that Ruby allowed herself to imagine a future here, not just a temporary arrangement, but a real home for all of them. None of them could know that at that very moment, Devlin Sneed was putting the finishing touches on his fraudulent rescue documents. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by official-looking papers and stamps, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his laptop screen. The photo of Harlan and Cricket stared back at him, a reminder of what he had lost and what he intended to reclaim. "Soon," he promised himself, sliding the completed paperwork into a professional-looking folder. Everything was in place. The fake rescue organization's letterhead, the manufactured history of Harlan's supposed theft, even business cards with his alias printed in bold text. By this time next week, he would have his fighter back. The thought brought a cold smile to his face as he closed his laptop, plunging the room into darkness. The contrast between these two scenes, the peaceful barn filled with healing and hope, and the shadowy apartment where plots of violence took shape, could not have been starker. While Ruby continued her gentle work of restoration, unaware of the approaching threat, Devlin's malevolent plans cast a long shadow over their fragile peace. The morning sun had barely crested the hills when 3 vehicles kicked up dust on the approach to Ruby's property. Her heart sank as she recognized the official animal control truck, flanked by 2 dark sedans. Something felt wrong. Ruby stepped onto the front porch, arms crossed, watching as the vehicles came to a stop in her gravel driveway. 3 men emerged. The first was tall and burly, wearing a crisp button-down shirt that barely contained his muscled frame. His slicked back hair and cold smile sent a chill down Ruby's spine. The other 2 wore animal control uniforms, but their stiff postures seemed out of place. "Mrs. Calderon." The burly man approached, extending his hand. "I'm Dennis Walker from Second Chance Animal Sanctuary. We've been searching for one of our evaluation cases, a large Anatolian shepherd that went missing 6 months ago." Ruby didn't take his hand. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Let me be clearer." He pulled out a folder filled with official-looking papers. "We have documentation showing this dog was under our care when he was stolen. We've been trying to locate him since then." The man's smile never reached his eyes. Ruby had spent decades as a trauma nurse, and she recognized predatory behavior when she saw it. This man, whoever he really was, set off every warning bell in her mind. "I found a stray dog," Ruby said carefully. "If you have proof of ownership, you should file a report with the sheriff's office." The man's smile tightened. "We have animal control here to verify our claim. We can do this the easy way, or we can involve the authorities." A low growl rumbled from inside the barn. Harlan stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the entrance. The moment his eyes locked onto the burly man, his entire demeanor changed. The peaceful, gentle giant Ruby had come to know transformed into something fierce and terrified. The man, who Ruby now suspected was Devlin Sneed, took a step toward the barn. "There's my boy," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Still as impressive as ever." Harlan's growl deepened, his lips pulled back, revealing teeth that had been used in too many fights. Ruby saw something she hadn't noticed before, a small scar on Devlin's forearm, exactly the kind of mark a dog bite would leave. "The papers," Devlin said, thrusting the folder at Ruby. "Everything's in order. We'll be taking him now." Ruby glanced at the documents. They looked official, but something was off about the letterhead. Her years of handling medical paperwork had taught her to spot inconsistencies. Devlin moved toward the barn, and that's when everything exploded into chaos. He reached for Cricket, who was visible in her nest of hay, saying, "Might as well take this one too. Looks like it needs to be put down anyway." Harlan erupted. His bark was like thunder as he launched himself forward, massive paws hitting the dirt with enough force to throw up dust. Devlin stumbled backward, genuine fear flashing across his face. The two fake animal control officers reached for weapons at their belts. "Run!" Ruby screamed. "Harlan, run!" The dog didn't hesitate. With incredible gentleness, despite his fury, he grabbed the makeshift sling Ruby had made for Cricket. The kitten dangled safely in the fabric as Harlan bolted past the men, his powerful legs carrying him toward the hills behind the property. "Stop him!" Devlin roared, but no one moved. They had all seen the fury in Harlan's eyes, the power in his charge. The dog disappeared into the scrub brush, Cricket secure in his care. Devlin turned on Ruby, his facade of professionalism completely gone. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "That dog is my property." Ruby drew herself up to her full height, channeling every ounce of authority she'd developed in her nursing career. "I think I know exactly who you are, Mr. Sneed, and I suggest you leave my property before I call the real authorities." For a moment she thought he might attack her, but even Devlin seemed to realize that assault would only make his situation worse. He gestured sharply to his companions, and they retreated to their vehicles. "This isn't over," he called out as he climbed into his sedan. "That dog is worth too much to me." Ruby watched them drive away, her heart pounding. As soon as they were out of sight, she ran into the house and grabbed her phone. She had 2 calls to make. One to the sheriff's office to report Devlin's attempted theft and fraudulent documents, and another to the vet clinic that had treated Cricket. Someone there had posted that photo online, and she needed to know exactly how far it had spread. As she dialed, she looked out toward the hills where Harlan had disappeared. The dog had proven himself more than just a protector. He had shown the intelligence and instinct to flee with Cricket rather than stay and fight. Somewhere in those hills, a giant dog and a tiny kitten were hiding together, counting on her to make it safe for them to return home. Ruby's hands trembled as she dialed the sheriff's office. Her mind kept racing back to Harlan and Cricket, alone in the wilderness. After leaving urgent messages with both the sheriff and the vet clinic, she made a split-second decision. She couldn't wait for help, not with storm clouds gathering again and Devlin still out there. Moving quickly, Ruby grabbed her old backpack from the truck. She stuffed it with bottled water, some of Cricket's soft food, and a heavy-duty flashlight. Her brother had taught her these hills during childhood summers, and those memories flooded back as she looked toward the ridgeline where Harlan had disappeared. "Please let them be okay," she whispered, shouldering the pack. The first drops of rain began to fall as she set out, following the most likely path Harlan would have taken, up toward the old limestone caves where they'd played as kids. The terrain grew steeper, loose rocks sliding under her boots. Ruby's legs burned with the effort, but she pressed on. The rain intensified, drumming against the scrub brush and creating curtains of water that limited visibility. She clicked on her flashlight, though the beam seemed weak against the growing darkness. Meanwhile, Harlan moved with purpose through the hills, Cricket's sling held carefully in his jaws. His powerful legs carried them over rocky outcrops, his nose working constantly to detect any sign of danger. When the rain began, he angled toward higher ground, instinct warning him about the dangers of the gullies below. Cricket remained surprisingly quiet in her sling, as if sensing the gravity of their situation. Only occasional tiny mews escaped her as Harlan navigated the treacherous terrain. The massive dog paused periodically, checking their surroundings with alert eyes that reflected years of survival experience. The storm intensified. Water began coursing down the hillsides in growing rivulets. Ruby's progress slowed as the path became treacherous, mud sucking at her boots. She knew these sudden storms could turn deadly. Flash floods were common in these hills, especially in the narrow gullies that cut through the landscape. Harlan had just started picking his way across one such gully when he heard it, a low, distant roar that his instincts recognized as danger. The sound grew quickly, and he looked upstream to see a wall of water charging down the narrow passage. In those crucial seconds, Harlan's training as a fighting dog transformed into something noble. Instead of dropping Cricket and saving himself, he clamped the sling more firmly in his teeth. With powerful legs bunching beneath him, he launched himself towards the gully wall. The water hit just as Harlan's front paws found purchase on the rocky slope. The force of it slammed against his back legs, nearly tearing Cricket's sling from his grip. But Harlan held firm, his muscles straining as he pulled them both up the steep incline. Cricket cried out in fear as water sprayed around them. Harlan pressed himself against the rock face, using his own massive body to shield the kitten from the worst of the deluge. Water cascaded over them, but Harlan stood firm, becoming a living barrier between Cricket and the elements. Ruby heard the roar of the flash flood, and her heart nearly stopped. She knew Harlan and Cricket had been heading in that direction. Forcing herself to remain calm, she changed course, working her way around to higher ground where she might spot them. Her phone buzzed, the vet tech calling back. Ruby ducked under an overhang and answered quickly. Those papers were completely fake, the young woman said without preamble. I did some digging. Devlin Sneed was convicted of running illegal dog fights 3 years ago. He's only been out on parole for 6 months. I knew something was wrong, Ruby said, having to raise her voice over the storm. He's after Harlan. The dog must have been one of his fighters. That's not all, the tech continued. He's been investigated for other crimes too. Assault, fraud, animal cruelty. His parole officer would definitely want to know about this. Call them, Ruby said firmly. Call everyone. I'm trying to find Harlan and Cricket before he does. She ended the call and pushed on, her flashlight beam cutting through the rain. Somewhere ahead, Harlan still stood braced against the gully wall, his massive form protecting Cricket as the floodwaters gradually began to recede. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but he didn't move until he was certain the danger had passed. Only then did Harlan carefully pick his way to higher ground, still keeping Cricket's sling elevated above the wet earth. The kitten was somehow still dry, thanks to both the sling's material and Harlan's protective instincts. He found a small hollow beneath an overhanging rock and settled there, placing Cricket gently in the driest spot before positioning himself at the entrance, alert for any approaching danger, whether from nature or man. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Ruby pushed through rain-slicked brush, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The storm had eased to a steady drizzle, but the ground remained treacherous. Her boots squelched in the mud as she followed what looked like large paw prints pressed into the soft earth. A flash of movement caught her eye, something pale against the darkness. Ruby swung her light toward it and her heart leaped. Through the gloom, she could make out the remains of an old wooden shelter, probably once used for livestock. The roof had partially collapsed, creating a triangular space beneath the fallen boards. There, huddled in the relative dryness, was Harlan's massive form. The big dog's ears pricked forward at her approach, but he didn't growl. Cricket's tiny shape was tucked safely against his chest, the makeshift sling now muddy but intact. Thank goodness, Ruby breathed, moving closer. You kept her safe, didn't you, boy? Harlan's tail gave a slight wag of recognition. Ruby had just reached the edge of the shelter when the crack of a branch made her freeze. Harlan's head snapped up, his hackles rising as a familiar voice cut through the rain. Well, ain't this touching? Devlin Sneed's drawl carried an edge of fury. He emerged from the shadows, flanked by his 2 fake animal control officers. All 3 men held flashlights, and Devlin gripped something else, a long black rod that Ruby recognized as a cattle prod. How did you find us? Ruby demanded, instinctively moving closer to Harlan and Cricket. Devlin's smile was cold. Small town, lots of folks happy to make a quick buck telling me where that distinctive truck of yours was headed. He took a step forward, twirling the prod. Now, let's make this simple. That's my dog, and I'm taking him back. He's not yours anymore. Ruby shot back, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You lost any right to him when you forced him to fight. That dog is worth thousands in the right circles, Devlin snarled. You think I'm going to let some bleeding-heart old woman steal my investment? Harlan had risen to his feet, moving to stand between Ruby and the approaching men. His massive head lowered, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. Cricket mewed softly from her spot in the shelter. Last chance, Devlin warned, raising the prod. Call him off, or this gets ugly. Ruby stood her ground. He's not the same dog you knew. He's chosen something better. Devlin's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward, jabbing the prod toward Harlan. The crackling blue arc connected with the dog's shoulder. Harlan yelped but didn't retreat. Instead, his powerful muscles bunched as he advanced, forcing Devlin back a step. What the... Devlin stabbed again with the prod, but Harlan seemed to absorb the pain, driven by something stronger than fear now. His teeth flashed in the darkness as he snapped at the weapon. Ruby saw her chance. As Devlin focused on Harlan, she darted forward and grabbed the shaft of the prod. Years of wrestling with unruly patients in the ER had taught her more than a few things about leverage. She twisted hard, yanking the prod from Devlin's grip. Without hesitation, she drove the crackling end into his side. Devlin howled, his body convulsing as he collapsed to his knees. His two companions started forward, but Harlan's thunderous bark stopped them cold. The massive dog positioned himself squarely between them and Ruby, his battle-scarred face promising violence if they took another step. The police are already on their way, Ruby said, keeping the prod trained on Devlin. Your parole officer, too. How do you think they'll feel about you trying to restart your fighting ring? Devlin struggled to his feet, his face contorted with hate. You have no idea what you've done, woman. No idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Ruby replied. A coward who hurts animals because he can't face real men. But that ends tonight. As if to emphasize her words, Harlan's growl deepened, the sound carrying all the menace of his fighting days, but now directed at the man who had tried to make him a weapon. In the shelter behind them, Cricket let out a determined little mewl, as if adding her own defiance to the standoff. The two fake officers exchanged glances, clearly realizing how quickly their situation was deteriorating. One of them grabbed Devlin's arm. Come on, boss. We need to get out of here. But before they could retreat, a new sound cut through the night. Police sirens, growing closer by the second. Red and blue lights began to flash through the trees, reflecting off the wet leaves and casting strange shadows across Devlin's suddenly pale face. The wail of sirens grew louder as red and blue lights flooded the clearing. 3 police cruisers pulled up, their tires crunching on wet gravel. Officers poured out with flashlights and drawn weapons, quickly taking in the scene, Ruby holding the cattle prod, Devlin on his knees, and Harlan standing guard with unwavering focus. Hands where we can see them, called out the lead officer. Everyone stay still. Ruby carefully set down the prod while Devlin and his men raised their hands. Harlan remained tense but didn't move, his eyes fixed on Devlin. A young woman in scrubs emerged from one of the patrol cars, the vet tech from the clinic. That's them, she confirmed to the officers. The dog and the woman I told you about. And that man, she pointed at Devlin, he's the one who tried using those fake papers. The officers moved in swiftly, cuffing Devlin and his associates. As they were being secured, Detective Sarah Martinez approached Ruby. Ma'am, I understand you have quite a story to tell us. Would you mind giving us your statement? Ruby nodded, keeping one hand rested on Harlan's broad back. The big dog's muscles were still taut, but his breathing had steadied. It started when I found them at my brother's old ranch, she began, recounting the discovery of Cricket and Harlan, the gradual building of trust, and Devlin's attempted kidnapping. While she spoke, other officers were searching Devlin's vehicle. Detective, one called out, you need to see this. In the trunk, they found shock collars, heavy chains, and detailed notebooks containing fighting schedules and betting records. There were photos of injured dogs and lists of names, evidence that Devlin had been planning to rebuild his operation. This matches cases we've been working in 3 other counties. Detective Martinez said, flipping through the notebooks. "Underground fighting rings we couldn't quite crack. Mr. Sneed here just handed us the missing pieces." The vet tech stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. "I'll testify about the forged paperwork," she offered. "When he came to the clinic asking about Cricket's photo, something felt wrong. The way he talked about animals. I started digging into his background." "You did the right thing," Martinez assured her. She turned to Ruby. "We'll need to document Harlan's injuries and have Cricket properly examined. They'll both need to be evaluated." Ruby felt panic rise in her chest. "You can't take him to a shelter. Harlan's not dangerous. Look at how he's protected Cricket, how he tried to save me." As if to prove her point, Cricket let out a small meow from her makeshift bed. Harlan immediately turned to check on her, his movements gentle despite his imposing size. "That dog's a killer," Devlin spat as officers led him toward a patrol car. "You have no idea what he's capable of." "We know exactly what he's capable of," Ruby countered firmly. "He's capable of choosing kindness over cruelty, of protecting the weak instead of exploiting them. Everything you tried to beat out of him, he held on to." Detective Martinez watched thoughtfully as Harlan nuzzled Cricket, then returned to Ruby's side. "Tell you what," she said. "We'll have our department's animal behavior specialist evaluate him. If Harlan checks out, and you're willing to work with a certified trainer, we can look at making you his legal guardian." "And Cricket?" Ruby asked. The vet tech smiled. "The clinic can supervise her recovery. We've already had donations coming in for a mobility cart since I posted her photo. She'll need a forever home eventually." Ruby felt tears welling up as she looked at her unlikely family. A battle-scarred guardian and a tiny fighter, both teaching her about resilience and second chances. "One more thing," Detective Martinez added, holding up Devlin's notebooks. "We'll need you both to make formal statements about everything you've seen and heard. This evidence could help us shut down fighting rings across the state." As Devlin was placed in the patrol car, he glared through the window at Harlan. But the dog barely spared him a glance, focused instead on gently nudging Cricket's makeshift sling closer to Ruby's feet. The kitten reached out with one small paw, batting at his nose with complete trust. "It's okay now," Ruby whispered, kneeling beside them both. "We're all going to be okay." Officers continued processing the scene, cataloging evidence and taking photographs. The vet tech helped Ruby carefully load Cricket into a carrier for transport to the clinic, while Harlan watched every movement with attentive care. His days of fighting were over. He had found a different kind of strength, a better purpose. Detective Martinez made notes as she watched them prepare to leave. "You know," she said, "in all my years working animal abuse cases, I've never seen anything quite like this. A fighting dog becoming a protector, saving a kitten, helping bring down his abuser. Some might call it a miracle." Ruby smiled, watching Harlan walk calmly beside the carrier holding Cricket. "Not a miracle," she corrected. "Just love doing what love does best, healing what hatred tried to break." The courthouse buzzed with tension as Ruby sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The prosecution had laid out an overwhelming case against Devlin Sneed, presenting evidence that stretched far beyond his attack at the ranch. Detective Martinez stood before the jury, pointing to enlarged photographs showing the complex web of Devlin's operation. "What you're looking at is a sophisticated criminal enterprise," she explained. "Mr. Sneed created a fake animal rescue organization called Second Chance Sanctuary to acquire fighting dogs and launder betting profits. Former employees turned state's evidence, describing how Devlin used the legitimate-seeming rescue as cover for his underground fighting ring. The young vet tech's testimony about the forged paperwork proved crucial, connecting Devlin's attempt to reclaim Harlan with his larger criminal scheme. The defendant didn't just abuse animals," the prosecutor addressed the jury. "He exploited people's compassion, using a false rescue organization to perpetrate his crimes. Every donation meant for helping animals instead funded illegal fights." Ruby listened as financial records revealed how Devlin had siphoned thousands of dollars from well-meaning donors. Her stomach turned, thinking about how many people he had deceived, how many animals had suffered. During breaks in the trial, Ruby found comfort in visiting Harlan at the rehabilitation center where he was undergoing evaluation. The animal behavior specialist had been amazed by his progress, documenting how the dog who once fought now showed remarkable gentleness, especially with smaller animals. "It's unprecedented," the specialist told Ruby, watching Harlan carefully guide a limping shelter dog during socialization training. "He's not just rehabilitated, he's become a natural therapy dog. His protective instincts have been completely redirected toward helping vulnerable animals." The formal assessment declared Harlan fully rehabilitated and safe for public interaction. Ruby felt tears of joy when she signed the adoption papers, making him officially hers. Meanwhile, Cricket's story had touched hearts across the country. A custom mobility device company, moved by viral photos of the tiny kitten being protected by the massive dog, designed and donated a specialized brace. Ruby watched in wonder as Cricket took her first steady steps, her twisted back legs supported by the lightweight frame. "Look at you go, sweet girl," Ruby encouraged as Cricket wobbled forward, determined to reach Harlan, who waited patiently ahead. The kitten's progress symbolized all their journeys toward healing. With the trial nearing its end, Ruby threw herself into renovating her brother's ranch. The property that had once represented loss now promised new beginnings. Members of local animal rescue groups, having followed the case closely, volunteered their help. "This could be something special," suggested Sarah, a rescue volunteer wielding a paintbrush. "The way Harlan helped Cricket, maybe this place could become a sanctuary for other animals needing rehabilitation." Ruby paused in her own painting, considering the idea. The barn was already taking shape, with fresh boards replacing rotted ones and new windows letting in light. The old ranch house, too, was slowly transforming, its rooms clearing of dust and memories. One evening, exhausted from physical labor but content, Ruby checked her phone and froze. There was a message from her son, Thomas, whom she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Mom, I saw the news stories about what happened at Uncle Mike's ranch, about the dog and the kitten, and everything you did to protect them. It made me think about a lot of things. Maybe we could talk sometime." Ruby had to sit down, her hands shaking. The message was tentative, careful, but it was hope. Like Cricket's first steps in her brace, like Harlan learning to trust again, it was a small movement toward healing. The jury returned their verdict the next day. Guilty on all counts. Devlin Sneed faced significant prison time for animal cruelty, fraud, and operating an illegal gambling enterprise. As he was led away, Ruby thought about how his attempt to reclaim Harlan had ultimately led to his entire operation crumbling. Ruby felt Harlan lean against her leg, his steady presence grounding her as always. Cricket, secure in her brace, purred from her carrier. Together, they had not just survived, they had helped bring justice, and in doing so, opened doors to unexpected new beginnings. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the newly repaired fence posts of Mike's old ranch. No, Ruby corrected herself, her ranch now. The bank had finally processed the paperwork, making it official just that morning. She pushed open the freshly painted front gate, its hinges no longer creaking thanks to the work of the local rescue volunteers who'd helped transform the property. The wide field before her had been cleared of decades of undergrowth and debris. New grass was starting to sprout in patches, creating a safe haven for the animals who would soon call this place home. Ruby breathed in deeply, taking in the earthy scent of fresh-cut hay and recent rain. A familiar jingling sound made her smile. Cricket, wearing her custom-fitted mobility brace, came bounding across the grass with surprising speed. The tiny calico's twisted back legs, once a source of helplessness, now moved with purpose thanks to the lightweight support system. The brace's metallic components gleamed in the golden light, a testament to the generosity of strangers touched by her story. "Easy there, speed demon," Ruby called out affectionately as Cricket zoomed past her, chasing a butterfly. Harlan followed at an easy lope, his massive frame relaxed, and his battle scars less prominent beneath his thickening coat. The Anatolian shepherd no longer carried himself like a hunted creature. Instead, he moved with the quiet confidence of a guardian who had found his true purpose. He paused beside Ruby, pressing his warm bulk against her leg in a gesture that had become their shared signal of trust. Ruby's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart did a little skip as she read the message from Thomas. "Coming home next week. Thought maybe I could meet them." Her son's words brought tears to her eyes. After 3 years of silence, their careful text exchanges over the past month had been like building a bridge, one plank at a time. Thomas had followed Cricket's recovery through social media, had read about Harlan's transformation, had seen his mother's quoted testimony at Devlin's trial. Somehow, this unlikely family of wounded souls finding healing together had opened a door that pride and old hurts had kept firmly shut. "You'll love them," Ruby typed back, then added, "They'll love you too." She tucked the phone away, not wanting to seem too eager, too hopeful. But hope was there, as warm and real as the setting sun on her face. Cricket had settled in a patch of wildflowers, her brace allowing her to sit comfortably as she watched insects buzz around her. Harlan lay nearby, head on his paws but eyes alert, always the protector. The sight of them together still amazed Ruby, how the massive dog had gone from fighting ring survivor to gentle guardian, how the tiny kitten had fought her way from helpless to determined. The renovated barn stood proud against the darkening sky, its new red paint bright and welcoming. Inside were fresh stalls, medical supplies, and space set aside for future residents. Sarah's suggestion of turning the place into a rehabilitation sanctuary for special needs animals had taken root in Ruby's mind. She could think of no better way to honor what Harlan and Cricket had taught her about healing and second chances. As twilight settled over the ranch, Ruby felt the profound rightness of where she stood. The property that had once represented her brother's final struggles now hummed with new life and possibility. She was no longer the grieving sister, the estranged mother, the retired nurse searching for purpose. She was all of these things, and something more, someone who had found her own kind of healing by helping others heal. Cricket mewed softly, ready for her evening meal. Harlan rose, shaking himself before padding toward the house where warm lights beckoned. Ruby followed them home, knowing that tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to make this dream of a sanctuary real. But for the first time in years, she wasn't facing it alone. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.